Good morning, everyone. I'm ecstatic to introduce Dr. Kathy DeAngelis, who's Professor Emeritus here at Johns Hopkins. Emerita. Now, Barbara told me that emerita is not a word.
No, it is a word. No, the letter that came from Dean Miller says emeritus to me.
Well, they did. I'm the first one who insisted. I'm a woman. Start using emerita.
Thank you.
So to the younger folk, us is male and is female.
Yeah, U.S. is
and
male.
Is neuter, so it's lucky no one's neuter. She's also been a dean here. She's been the vice dean for academic affairs and faculty, and perhaps most importantly for what we'll hear this morning, she's Emerita Editor-in-Chief at JAMA, where you were 12 years?
11 and a half.
11 and a half years as really a reforming editor, and one of her lasting marks has to do with conflict of interest, which we'll be hearing about this morning. But I'll tell you a little bit about her before we get going. She received her MD from the University of Pittsburgh and then her MPH from Harvard. And she has numerous honorary doctorates and has received numerous awards as well. So most recently, she's done some interesting things. Maybe she'll tell you about it. I don't know. She's on the advisory board for the Government Accountability Office.
I could tell you about that.
No. And is a member of the Board of Physicians for Human Rights. She's doing a lot of human rights work right now. So most of her recent publications have focused on professionalism and integrity in medicine, on conflict of interest in medicine, which is what we'll be hearing about today, women in medicine and medical education. And I think recently she told me she's going to Burma tomorrow, so maybe that's related to some of the human rights work that you're doing. But today we're going to hear about...
No, actually it isn't. That is related to... Mike Clegg is coming with me, and Mian Nguyen is coming with me from the School of Public Health. My husband, who's a professor here, developmental neuropsychiatry. So the four of us are going there to help. We hope that we'll be able to help them get their medical school curriculums back on track. There are 5 med schools in Burma. One is the military, and the other 4 are 2 in Yangon, and 2 others around the country, 1 in Mandalay and that. But so we're going to do a 3-day workshop, and then I'm going to also try to work with the people from their journal for continuing medical education. And the whole idea is to make sure there's a professionalism, and I'll tell you a little bit about that later. Okay? First of all, I want to thank you very much for inviting me to share some thoughts with you. I said it is my utmost respect for Taddy that I'm here this morning because I'm still trying to get everything together so we can go to Burma. Myanmar. I spent most of yesterday, the day before, trying to find 50 crisp, brand new, unmarked, unblemished, completely brand new $100 bills so that I can go there to pay the darn bills. And when I was a kid, if I had a nickel, I felt great. I'm walking around with $5,000. It's crazy. But that's the only way. There's no credit cards. There is a bank, but it doesn't function. But that tells you the status of this country that was once the epitome of science and technology in Southeast Asia. So we'll see what'll happen. I heard this morning there's a good chance that maybe President Obama is going to go there. So that ought to help. And some of you may know Aung San Suu Kyi. If you don't, take a look at her life and you'll understand why people like me got so turned on about Burma. Okay, enough about that. Taddy asked me to talk about the conflicts of interest in medicine, and that is not a typo. That is facts and friction, because believe me, there was a tremendous amount of friction in the whole area of conflict of interest. And these are my financial disclosures. That's in every language. Oh, man, that didn't come out. Shoot, that's the one that's from Burma. My husband actually took... I have it in Burmese. I don't know why that didn't come out. But anyway, but this is for the New Yorkers, so just forget about it. I have no conflicts of interest. All right. The definition of conflict of interest. Now, this is nothing new. I mean, it's a main entry, at least as far back as 1850, in what was then Webster's Collegiate Dictionary. And it's a conflict between the private interest and the official responsibilities of a person in a position of trust. And that's what's key there. A person in a position of trust. And everyone in this room, if you're doing anything that deals with the health of the public, you're in a position of trust because people are depending on you to be honest and to the best of your ability publish the best and to work in the best way you know how so that their interests come first in your professional life. This is the characteristics of, I say the medical profession, but because that's where I function, even though I started out as a nurse. That was at a time when people told my parents and me that any woman who wanted to be a doctor had to be a nurse first. Anyhow, I want you to take a look at it. This is my interpretation, really, or simplification of the characteristics of a profession. I should tell you right now, I'm just finishing a book for Oxford University Press where I talk about patient care and professionalism, which is really what I'm heavily involved in now, and that I'm going to spend the rest of my life working on that. And there are chapters in there dealing first with the whole history of professionalism, talking about what went on in England or the UK, because that's where modern professionalism got its start. And then there's a chapter from the American Board of Internal Medicine, because they're the people who really had the major initiative in the United States. But there's a chapter on medicine, the medical profession, nursing, public health, law, business, religion, and patient advocacy. So it's trying to put all that together to say, essentially, if you're dealing with patient care, you better start thinking like a team. We should have been thinking like a team always, but it's especially important now, and that has a lot to do with conflict of interest. The conflict of interest between who's sitting at the table, who's in charge, always this power stuff, which has always mitigated the ability for all our professions to work as a team. I say to people, because I have the puberty ritual background in medicine, nursing, and public health, and I've been a patient, unfortunately, too often, I'm the living example of team care and patient care. But it seems to me that because each of those puberty rituals, as I call them, are so different, it's essential that we work as a team. Now, just looking at it from the medical profession, but it probably holds true for all professions, we have a special knowledge, and this is what makes a profession. We have a special knowledge and skills, and thereby that gives us the authority and rewards. That essentially means we have a tremendous responsibility, and our standards better be very high. And in many ways, this used to be called autonomy, and that's not right, because nobody who is so charged with health of people should be able to just completely have authority. So what it is we regulate ourselves. Now, I want to tell you, if you doubt anything about the authority and rewards, I'd like to tell the story of, there's these two guys on a train in Italy. And the one guy looks at the other. He says, "Scusa, what's your name?" This guy says, "My name is Giuseppe Pasqualini. What's your name?" He says, "My name is Giuseppe Pasqualini too." He said, "Where you from?" He says, "I'm from Palermo. Where you from?" "I'm from Palermo too. How you spell your name?" Guy gets a piece of paper and a pencil, and he makes an X. And then he says, "How you spell your name?" This guy takes out a gold pen. He makes 2 X's. So this guy says, "Scusa, how come? You Giuseppe Pasqualini, I'm Giuseppe Pasqualini. You are from Palermo, I'm from Palermo. How come you get 2 X, I get 1? He says, "Oh, I'm a Giuseppe Pasqualini, MD." That's probably the only time you're going to hear where 2 X's are better than 1. But that's a different lecture, I'm sorry. Okay, so essentially there's where we go with the characteristics, and keep that in mind, and you see what I have in the middle here. Trust is what holds it all together. And anytime you break that trust, as you will in any conflict of interest that will bear on a patient's care, then you have you're breaking your profession. Okay, now conflicts of interest can be real, potential, actual. A lot of them are inconsequential. I mean, we are human beings, and we do have conflicts of interest. Some of it is just the way we think. I mean, you can say we have differences, and the differences sometimes might lead us to lean a certain way, and it conflicts with the interest of someone else. I think a lot of that happened yesterday at the voting polls, but that doesn't mean that it's bad or that it's consequential, or harmful. Conflicts of interest are ubiquitous and inevitable. They just because of human nature. Now, what about the conflicts of interest from investigators, authors, and reviewers? Well, why do these individuals have these conflicts of interest? Well, career advancement, peer recognition, competing research interest, competition for research grants, garnering high-profile publications, intellectual biases and passions, and, of course, the big one is the financial. So, what about editors? Well, editors have conflicts of interest that could be potentially extremely harmful because of promotion of our journals or ourselves. We want to improve our impact factor. Now, to me, I would take the impact factor and throw it out the window right now if I could. It's being misused. Thomson, Reuters, ISI, it's a multi-million dollar business for them. And it was not, the whole idea of measuring impact factor was not meant to be used the way it is. It was meant as one way of looking at the potential quality, scientific quality of a journal article. And it's misused. It can be manipulated. I can tell you ways if you wanted to manipulate it, which I always refuse to do. But if you want to talk about it later, we can, but I want to get through some of this other stuff. That IF, impact factor, to me, was the bane of my existence. The IF factor that I cared about was the integrity factor, and that is the honesty with which a journal is run. So we want to improve the impact factor. We want to increase subscriptions. We want to increase the financial profitability of the journal. And we want to eliminate or decrease stress, hostility, or harassment. And if you think there's no stress, hostility, or harassment in being an editor, I would have invited you to spend one day with me. I actually had someone who asked if it was a reporter who said, "Can I come and spend the day with you?" I said, "Sure," because it wasn't a day we were working on deciding what journal articles to take. She lasted 3 hours and said, "I can't stand this." She says, "How do you keep it together?" And I said, "I just don't take my Ritalin and I'm fine." Essentially, that's it. I mean, it can drive you crazy. On the other hand, it was one of the nicest things I ever did in my life. It was great. It was exciting. Okay, the financial conflicts of interest. That's any paid affiliation or financial involvement with any entity that has an interest in the subject of or materials in the study. It's pervasive, it's increasing, and it's undergoing intense scrutiny. Physicians who work with drug companies in a way that advances their financial being and does nothing for the integrity of their practice, including their research. That's what I'm talking about. Speaking on a speaker's bureau is wrong because if you're on a speaker's bureau, the bad part is not necessarily that the drug company whose speaker's bureau you work on pay for you to speak. What's wrong is you must use their slides. And their slides are biased. They promote what is the good part of something, and we'll get into a little bit more of that. The other thing is, I don't know how many of you go to some of the medical meetings anyway. You'll have somebody speaking from the Speakers Bureau, and they're talking about drug X, which is good for Ratz-Frats disease. And they're giving you the biased stuff. In the audience, there's another person, another physician, who also happens to have been their way paid and, of course, an honorarium because of their time and effort. And that person asks the speaker, Dr. Jones, you use drug X for Ratz-Frats disease. Have you ever thought about using it for Gazornoplat disease? To which he replies, yes, as a matter of fact, I have. Now, the other disease is something for which the drug is not approved by the FDA. It's known as a physician can write a prescription for anything. Doesn't have to be FDA approved. So it's called off-label use, meaning I can sell more if somebody is using it for something that I didn't have to go through all the harassment to get an FDA approval. As a pediatrician, I spent most of my life writing for prescriptions for off-label use because they didn't do the studies on anybody under 14. And so it wasn't officially approved by the FDA, a simple antibiotic. If I wrote a prescription for ampicillin, it was off-label use because the drug companies didn't do the studies. And incidentally, the only way we're now getting the pharmaceutical companies to look at and to do studies on kids is the promises that they will get 6 extra months of patent. So it's worth their while because it costs them more money. Okay. It's financial conflicts of interest. There's a payment or remuneration somehow. Bringing breakfast, lunch, and dinner to doctors' offices to get their attention, or taking them to a ball game or whatever. It's material having to do with the financial interest. It can be affiliations, consultancies. Now, let's be careful on the consultancies because a physician or a researcher a medical researcher or a healthcare researcher who is a consultant for a drug company or a device company that's not a problem. In fact, that's something that should happen. And you should be paid a reasonable amount of money. But if you're paid an exorbitant amount of money, because what you're doing is actually promoting the drug and not only consulting, or you agree to put your name on an article that you didn't really do the research, or you didn't actually see the results. Don't look at me like that. I'm going to show you some examples of this, okay? That's wrong. That's absolutely wrong. So, that's the difference between an honest consultancy, using my expertise to help you to decide what kinds of research you should be doing, what drugs you should be working on, and what are the mechanisms, versus the other. Competing interests and these financial conflicts of interest are current, recent, remote, and probably future. When I talk about competing interests, if you're a reviewer and you're working on the same thing that this paper talks about, and you pan it because you want to get your paper out first, that's wrong. And especially if financially it'll mean something to you, because you may get promoted and therefore your salary gets increased. Anyhow, you get the idea. Who knows who this is? Any Brits here? No. Okay. This is Sir Isaac Newton. This is actually from a painting by Sir William Blake. And Isaac Newton always was the epitome of scientific integrity. There he is, intensely looking at, with his caliper here. Now you got to remember, this is 19th century painting, okay? Sir Isaac Newton. Look at this. Look at that leer. What's that in his hands? What's that? Huh? Science and profit. Are they partners or enemies?
That's at $5,000 and $100.
Yeah, $5,000 and $100 crisp bills. Yeah. No, that's $1,000 bill. I've never seen one of those. Anybody here ever seen $1,000 bill? Good God. I'm not sure.
And it's a double helix.
It's a double helix, of course. But you see, this is where we are now. You got a control group, and then you got the out-of-control group. That's the conflict of interest group. Okay, increasing scrutiny. We have a skeptical public. There are high-profile lapses of business ethics, and I'm going to show you some of them. There's been a transformation of the research enterprise, the privatization of biomedical research. And I'll show you some figures in a little bit. Financial self-interest of the investigators, and increased awareness and attention in biomedicine by the public. Now, this is from Amazon.com, all right? 5-star. Influence physician behavior. This is the Bible of the agents who come to physicians' offices to get them to promote their drug. Be brief, be bright, be gone, right? Career Essentials for Pharmaceutical Representatives by Currier and Frost. 5 stars. You should read it. It's disgusting. I have actually 3 people now who are, 2 of them are, they now have PhDs and they're doing research, but they used to work for the drug companies. And when they told me, I checked this out with 3 people now. 2 people told me spontaneously, and I checked it with the 3rd. What do you think is one of the first things? Well, first of all, women physicians, especially if they're younger, have nice, handsome guys who come, okay? And men have these young, good-looking women. It's more important for the good-looking part be for the men than the women. The women, it could be another woman. It depends on the woman. But guess what's one of the first things that the pharmaceutical representative must learn about a woman physician, a younger woman physician? What do you think? Pardon?
Age.
I'm sorry, what? Marital status? No.
Age.
Age? Nah, that's pretty easy.
The same criteria that used to be applied to airline stewardesses.
Which is?
I don't know,
Measurement.
pretty.
Personality.
Pretty personality. No, well, you could say anybody can get that by looking at it. Right? No, menstrual cycle. I couldn't make that up.
How do they find this out?
How did they find it out? Oh, they just, they're nice to the office nurse or the office secretary or whatever. Why do they want to know that? Because they don't want to go in when she's in her bitchy mood, which is, to me, offensive. But, I'm just, look, I couldn't make this up, people. I couldn't make this up, okay?
And invent these things.
Yeah. Okay. Now, the outcome of the profit strategy, and this is the big thing. Pharma has focused more on marketing, less on finding novel drugs, and so the pipeline for new drugs is drying up to the point where now we're in deep doo-doo. Do you want to know what worries me more than anything else about the future of medicine and healthcare? Infectious disease. We are up against the wall as far as having really strong, effective antibiotics. Now, why is that? Because bugs are smart. And so the profit margin on antibiotics is relatively short and therefore small, because the organisms develop resistance pretty rapidly. So it's not in the interest of the pharmaceutical companies. I mean, look, let me be clear about one thing, because if I were sitting there, I'd probably think I was against pharmaceutical companies. I am not. I am against some of their practices. But if we didn't have the pharmaceutical companies, we'd still be taking my grandmother's brioche, whatever the heck that stuff was that she gave for everything. We need pharmaceutical companies. And this is America. They are a for-profit company. I have no problem with that. I just don't like the dishonesty involved in making profits. And the big problem, well, I'll tell you that in a minute. The literature on conflict of interest, the focus has been on industry-investigator relationships, the ethical considerations, and the issue of influence. And I would say, I'm going to change that slide, because it's not only ethical considerations, it's professional considerations. And people say, well, what's the difference? There's a big difference. You can be ethical and unprofessional. You cannot be professional and unethical. And it has to do with the way you treat people and some other things. But that's another lecture. But I'm going to add professional considerations, professional and ethical considerations. Now, look at this. I actually had somebody do this for me. I said, go back like to this in the 70s. Look at how many articles on conflict of interest were cited in PubMed. And they went back, they said, Dr. D, we shouldn't, look, once we went to 74, I mean, it's level. For almost a decade here, it's level. And then you look and say, well, it's even more than a decade. It's almost, it's 15 years. Nothing, just smattering. What happened here? And it's leveled off. 2011, it's back up to 600 again. So it's leveled off at about 600. What happened here? Anybody know? Well, the CEO of a major pharmaceutical company made the decision that there should be a marriage, and that was his word, between the two divisions that make up pharmaceutical companies. The two divisions in pharmaceutical companies are the scientific division and the marketing division. The scientific division, let me be real clear about this, some of the best and brightest and most wonderful scientists work for pharmaceutical companies in the scientific bureau. And they're very, very good at what they do. The same is true in the marketing. They are really good at marketing. That's what they know how to do. Their idea is sell the product, and they do it. Now, it used to be that the vast majority of the funds went towards the scientific. Let's find new drugs. And the marketing was, well, we've got good products, so we just sell it. But this CEO said, look, it costs, and the amount of money it costs for a new drug it's all over the place. But let's say it's $1 billion. It's probably around that. It probably costs that much when you think of how many non-starters, you put money in and then it doesn't pan out. Let's just say it costs $1 billion. Well, if it costs $1 billion to develop a new drug and get it approved by the FDA, that's a lot of money. Now, suppose I can take a drug that is already, it's already approved for the FDA, and we can do what I said before. We sell it to people who don't really need it. What do you think happened with Vioxx? You see Dorothy Hamill, hell man, I want to do that too, huh? That was sold to 20 million people. Probably 1 to 2 million really needed Vioxx, and the other drugs would have made the same thing. It's much more expensive drug. It was untested when they started pushing it. And so by marrying the two, you just say, these are the drugs already approved. Go out and sell it. Which meant we're putting more money there and we're taking more away from the developing new drugs. Okay? And look what happened. Reports on conflict of interest when that happened. It's just amazing to me. Now, again, let's be very clear of why we absolutely must have the for-profit pharmaceutical and device companies. Because if you look at this is NIH money. Now, this is 2007, but I can extend this out to 2010. And it is flat. In fact, on a dollar basis, it's decreasing. And God only knows what's going to happen this year. There's a really big danger. We're going to be in really bad trouble. And this is federal support. When you see that's pretty even, too. This is pretty steady since about 2003, 2004. So for about a decade, it's not increasing. And when you think about inflation, it's actually decreasing. Now, these are private funds. That's pretty flat also. But look at the pharmaceutical firms. And this continues to rise. And the biotechnology, that continues to rise. And the medical device. All this is private for profit. That's about 2/3. Now, it's about 60% there. It's about 2/3 of all the money for research does not come from the feds. And when you look at the kind of research that the feds support, it's not clinical research. A very small percentage of NIH money goes for clinical research. And so we absolutely need the for-profit companies. But the for-profit companies better be a lot more honest than they have been. Why does it matter? Well, financial interests or relationships can bias what the authors publish or investigators publish, when, how, and in some cases even if research is published. Now, I'm going to tell you a story about requiring pharmaceutical and device companies to register their clinical trials. You all know the clinical trials are the only thing that can show causality. Everything else is just association. So the clinical trials, those are the kinds of studies that every editor looks for, every investigator wants to be able to do. Okay? So, the law in the United States, from as early as about, in the early 2000s, it may have been by 2000, the law said that anybody involved in clinical research must register the trial the day they enrolled the first patient. And in the United States, it had to be registered at clinicaltrials.gov, the National Library of Medicine, right? You would think that's great, right? Well, Don Lindbergh, who's the director of the National Library of Medicine, was on my editorial board. And when I would get a clinical trial, I mean, you know, it's interesting. The clinical trials, the first thing you change is the summation. This is the greatest thing that blah, blah, blah. It isn't. Under these circumstances, in this population, this seems to work, or this works, okay? But for a number of them, I knew there were other studies that had been done. So I went to clinicaltrials.gov. I couldn't find anything. In fact, there wasn't much of anything in there. So I called Don and I said, Don, what's going on? He says, nobody's enforcing the law. He says, FDA doesn't go after them. Nobody goes after them, so they just don't register them. So I'd say, but this is crazy. So I'll never forget this. It was about 2003 or 2002. There's this group called the ICMJE. Do you know what that is? It's the International Committee of Medical Journal Editors. We're a committee. At that point, there were, I think, 11 of us. This used to be known as the Vancouver Group. It's just a group of editors that gets together once a year and discusses mutual issues. The thing is that they're the editors. You can't volunteer to join. You can't join. You got to be invited, which is kind of crazy. Except it's just a group of people. And so but the journals involved are JAMA, New England Journal, Lancet, BMJ, the Annals of Internal Medicine, the Canadian, Australian, New Zealand, Netherlands, Norway, Croatia. Yeah, those were the ones then, and then the National Library of Medicine had a member. So there were 12 of us, including the National Library of Medicine. Now, there's some very good things that came from it. I mean, there's ICMJE recommendations for authors and editors, which lots of people use. It's just really good stuff. So I go to the meeting. It's in Dubrovnik this year. And I said, you know, I have a problem. I said, because I get these clinical trials, and, you know, I do all the right thing, and I get it reviewed, and it's all this stuff is great, but I know there were other studies, and I have no idea what happened in the other studies. And it would help me a great deal, because I could say in the discussion, while this worked in this population under these conditions, there were 3 other studies, or 2 other studies. 2 were never completed. Well, what does that tell you? Or 1, you know, showed negative results in a different population. That would make the paper look a lot different. everybody, I mean, if you can imagine 11 editors agreeing on anything, it's incredible. We agreed immediately. And they said, well, what are we going to do? I said, well, suppose we all get together. It's just 11 of us. But suppose we all get together and we say, if you don't register according to the law, because it turned out that the Brits liked it too, if you don't register, we won't publish your paper. We won't even review it. They said, okay. And so what we did is we all got together. We wrote a joint editorial that appeared the same week in all of those 11 journals. And we gave the people a year to register the clinical trials that were ongoing. But after that year, the year was up in September, you had, going forward, you had to register. First patient, you register the trial, or we won't even look at it. Well, I thought the pharmaceutical companies were going to have a stroke. I said, that's the one time in my life I was really happy I had my Uncle Guido with me, because... So they were, oh my God, they're saying, oh, you're blah, blah, blah. And I said, okay, look. So I got the IOM, the Institute of Medicine, to host, not sponsor, to host the meeting of the medical journal editors and anybody else who wanted to come. And so I was there as an editor. I think Jeff Drazen from New England Journal was on the phone periodically. He was at another meeting. And I think Hal Sachs, then he was editor of Annals, was there. But the others, Lancet, BMJ, and Canadian, all that stuff, gave me permission to represent the ICMJE. So we're going back and forth, and the pharmaceutical people saying, no, DeAngelis, you're impinging on our right to privacy. And I said, who are you kidding? As soon as you register the first patient, people know you're doing the study. So don't give me that baloney. And we're back and forth and back and forth. And then there was somebody from the FDA who said to me, Dr. DeAngelis, why do you care? Well, what I said to him was, sir, are you from the FDA? And he says, yes. I said, I care because you don't. Well, I thought people were going to fall off their chair. Or I just said. And they said, what? I said, sir, that's it. I said, it seems you don't care. Maybe you do care, but if you do care, you're not implementing it. I said, and I'll tell you why I care. I said, because these companies are using the integrity of my journal, and therefore my integrity, to sell their product. Because I'm publishing only what they give me, and not everything I need. I said, so if you don't give me everything I need, I'm not going to publish it. Well, how are you know, blah. And I said, there are 1,500 biomedical journals. We only represent 11. New England Journal, JAMA, Lancet, okay, do I have to tell you? The result? A year later, I mean, they started to trickle in. But, you know, not all that many were coming in. 3 days before the final day, I get in, and I was handling all the clinical trials. I wanted to see them all. I get a brand new one that looked like a really good study. And I wanted to send it out for review. So I called the author, and I said, you know, this looks like a good study, and I want to send it out for review, but I can't. He said, what do you mean? I said, it's not registered. He says, what do you mean? I said, come on. And I gave him the reference. I said, and you can look it up in any of these journals. Go ahead. And I said, call me back after you've read it, which he did. And he said, oh, he said, we could do that. I said, good, do it. Call me with the registration number, and we're cool. He called me back about 2 hours later and says, Dr. D, I can't do it. I said, why? He said, well, this was sponsored by a drug company, and they won't let me do it. I said, okay. I said, then I can't send it out for review. He said, but it's a good study. I said, yeah, but. So I said, look, I'm not going to punish you. So what I want you to do is withdraw the paper so that you don't have to say it was rejected by JAMA. And he said, well, what do I said, look, if you can call me, I'll hold the paper. I won't register it, but I'll hold the paper until it was like Friday afternoon, Friday at 5. I said, if you call me then with the number, I'll send it out for review. He said, well, okay. It was Friday at 4 o'clock. He called me. He says, I have the registration number. I said, oh, yeah, and he gave it to me. I said, okay, we're cool. And I called the National Library of Medicine. Yeah, they said, yeah, he registered it. And they said, we're starting to get piles of these things. I didn't know it, but at the same time, Jeff Drazen from New England Journal had the same experience with a different study, not the same one. He did the same thing. We didn't talk to each other because you can't talk to another journal editor about an article that you have. But he did the same thing I did. Within the next week, I think it was 7,000, close to 7,000 trials were registered. And Don Lindbergh called me. He says, I don't know whether to hug you or kill you. He said, I had to hire new people to register these. I said, isn't that what you wanted? He said, yeah. So the idea there is how a small group of people, if you really care, the difference you can make. That's the lesson. So, about a couple years later, in 2005, I was hit by a bus standing on the corner of in Chicago. And I told people, fortunately, it hit me and I went backwards and not in front of the bus. But I said to people, the last thing I remember, I looked up and here's this bus driver with a farmer hat on. But it wasn't. It didn't happen. But it was a good story. Especially since he broke my pelvis and in a couple places. And so I was walking around on crutches and canes for a while. And I went to a meeting where there were some farmer people. And I told them that story. And they said, are you kidding? I said, yes, of course I'm kidding. God. Okay. All right. Next. The scope of financial interest. The prevalence, it's 1 to 2 in 4 investigators have industry affiliations, depending what study you look at. And the association between industry sponsorship and pro-industry conclusions, odds ratio of about 3.6 or more, depending which studies you look at. Financial interest recommendation, this is just Chaudhry, this is a 2002 study. These figures, this is an old study, but the figures are the same. You could just take a look at that. The suppression of results. This was the thyroid storm. This was Betty Dong. She did a clinical trial looking at Synthroid versus the bioequivalent or the generic drug. Everybody expected Synthroid to look better. It didn't. It was bioequivalent. And the company was able to delay publication for 3 years. They held it up in court. And, of course, they had the patent all this while. We published the paper. We also published the editorial pointing out this happened to me. I was at JAMA about 6 months, and I got this call from Professor Khan. He was the chief investigator on investigating an HIV immunogen. And he called me and he said, look, he said, he was from UCSF. Betty Dong was from UCSF too. And the reason I should tell you why the company was able to hold up the thyroid study for 3 years is because when they signed the contract, the lawyers gave the company the right of when it would be published where and all that kind of stuff. So now along comes Kahn, 3 years later, okay? And he says, look, he says, I have this study. He said, but I'm missing 15% of the group because they had to do a multi-site. He said, there's no way that this works. He says, so we have a bunch of people with AIDS who are depending on this vaccine that doesn't work. Rather than getting medications they should be getting, because the company won't let me publish this. They say you can't publish it without nobody will publish it because you don't have the power to show it. I said, let me see the study. Well, he didn't have the power, but it was pretty clear, and I showed it to 4 statisticians and said, what do you think? And they said, there's no way this works, no matter what the results are. I said, okay, I'm going to publish it. And I said, I'll publish it with an editorial explaining why we did it. Well, as soon as I told him I would do it, the next day I got a call. And it was this guy on the other end, and he says, Dr. DeAngelis? I said, yes, sir. He said, this is Hodges from Hodges, blah, 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 blah. And I said, oh, excuse me. I said, are you a lawyer, sir? He says, yeah. I said, well, I don't speak legalese, but here's the name and phone number of our lawyer. He says, no, you don't understand. He said, I'm talking about suing. I said, okay. I said, talk to the lawyer. He says, you don't understand, lady. I'm going. That got me off my seat. He said, we're going to sue you. So I developed my favorite Japanese new word, so sue me. Well, they didn't. Instead, what they did was to sue UCSF for $8 million because they published the paper, but the arbitration ruled in favor of the university. Because the same lawyers learned from Betty Dong, and this time the university had the right to publish what, when, how, and where. And so the company lost. And it's a failed vaccine, and thank God the people got back on the drug they needed because the vaccine doesn't work. Deliberate lying. You all know about the class study that's the celecoxib associated with lower incidence of gastric ulcers and ulcer complications. Now, when I got this paper, I looked at it, and it was, we always look at the protocol, and it was a 12-month study. And I said, well, these are only 6 months results. And they said, yeah. I said, well, we could look at it as a preliminary communication. But I said, you sure they don't have 12 months? And the editor who was handling it said, yeah. I said, get it in writing. So we had it in writing. We only have 6 months. We published the paper that looked like there was less gastric bleeding using Celebrex than NSAIDs and other drugs. Then I got a phone call from somebody saying, they have it. It's in the FDA site. It's in a funny kind of site. I said, okay, I'll get it. And I went in, and absolutely, they had 12 months. And you know what happened is, this is the NSAIDs bleeding, this is Celebrex bleeding, okay? 6 months it went like this. So what I did is we published the clarification, and we published an apology, and the reply from the company. Deliberate lying. This is the CONVINCE trial. This is a verapamil investigation of cardiovascular endpoints. This was on over 16,000 hypertensive patients. The sponsor terminated the trial for commercial reasons. They were bought out. And they said, no, we're going to do something different. Well, it's a violation of the pact with patients and investigators. So we published the paper. It looked like it was going to work. It looked like it would work, but they weren't going to make enough money on it. Well, that's not right. So we published it. Made somebody else happy. Hiding bag news. Oh, you know about Vioxx, right? The Vigor trial. This paper has never been withdrawn But the expression of concern was published twice. This is Bombardier lying. When this was published in New England Journal in 2000, I got a paper this is a clinical trial. I had a paper that was, I think it was case control. And it showed that there's no way this could be right. So I called Jeff Drazen. I said, Jeff, did you look at this stuff? Because it looks like there's some MIs missing, myocardial infarctions missing. He said, look, Kathy, the same people you read JAMA as read New England, so they're alerted. 2 years later, he called me and said, my God, he says, we got the lawyers all over us on this. And he said they did. They hid some MIs. And Bombardier actually she did not do all the stuff on this. Like she was the first author, but she was not the first author. It's fabrication. This is that whole business from science about the patient-specific embryonic stem cell derived from humans, blastocytes. And the science published an expression of concern. I should tell you that paper was originally rejected by Science, but there was some manipulation, and then they accepted it. This is just a copy of showing what happened with the verapamil, with the Vioxx trials, and just guest authorship, ghostwriting. It's just absolutely ridiculous how much of this. It took me 6 months before I would publish this because I wanted to make sure we had everything online so that people who would deny. I had 4 authors who called me absolutely claiming that that this was not what they did, blah, 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 until I told them where to go online, anybody could get it, and to show them letters that they wrote. It was just absolutely incredible. And this is just ensuring integrity in industry-sponsored research. And this one was people approaching Steve Nissen and his experience with them, and how the pharmaceutical company tried to threaten him and manipulate him. And it was our editorial about it. So whether or not warranted, the total result arouses public concerns and threatens the credibility of biomedical research. So financial interests are ubiquitous. They involve researchers, authors, reviewers, editors. The policies on disclosure are essential and must ensure transparent reporting, and managing conflicts of interest appropriately is essential to ensure the public's trust. Now, I want to tell you just one more story of the fun and games of being an editor. One of the rules that I had, and most of the good journals have, is you will not publish an ad next to an article, okay, that shows you that talks about the same thing. Well, in JAMA, actually, there's a way. I couldn't stop them from accepting ads. I mean, I don't own the journal. But what you can do in JAMA is we have the well. And if you take out from the first page of a scientific article to the last page of the scientific articles, you rip it. There's not an ad in there. And on either side, there's no ad that in any way looks the same. They're usually JAMA ads or AMA ads or something. So I got a call from our ad group, and they said, Dr. D, we got a request for a very, very expensive 4-page ad by whatever company, but they want a specific issue. I said, we don't allow them to pick the issue. I mean, they could buy 5 or 6, and then they get a whole bunch of them, and she said, no, they only want that. I said, no, they can have any issue but that. She said, okay. She calls me back and she says, Dr. D, they only want that issue. So I looked up what was scheduled for that issue. Sure enough, this company, which is a small company, but they had a nice clinical trial showing that their product probably worked. I said, look, I can't publish it then. They can have anyone. She said, but they only want that one. And she says, Dr. D, this is one of the biggest ads that we've ever had. So I said, okay, publish it. She said, really? I said, yeah. And I moved the article ahead 2 weeks. I gave them what they wanted. But it just shows you the kinds of crazy shenanigans that goes on. So anyway, I love this. This is the last slide. This is a cover of a slide my husband actually gave me for our anniversary. I can't imagine why he should. But anyway, it just shows to me how if you can get two porcupines to be that close, surely we investigators, editors, authors, practitioners, clinicians, whatever, and the pharmaceutical and device companies could surely come together. I would love that to be the Democrats and the Republicans too, but who knows? Yeah, there you go. So we really need to work together, and I think we just have to be ever vigilant and make it happen. Thank you. It's time. I'm sorry.
So some of you need to go to class and do go to class, but why don't we just take a few more minutes?
Yeah, I'm here. I'll stay here to answer questions. Barbara?
One of my concerns that I've seen with my own colleagues in my department is they think there's nothing wrong with the drug company analyzing the data and writing the paper, and then they just review it and sign off on it.
That's what I'm...
Especially the younger clinicians. They say we're too busy. We don't have time to write all these.
Well, show them some of these.
But it's hard to get this across to them. It's really very, very difficult.
Well, then you see why we have a skeptical public.
Yeah, but we even had an experience at one of our Cochrane Eyes and Vision Group systematic review workshops where one of the faculty was saying something about industry authorship of papers. They said, "Oh, we think it's great."
Oh, sure. Yeah.
We don't have time to write those papers. Let them write the papers.
Yeah. Well.
One thing you didn't talk about was institutional professionalism and responsibilities of institutions to act in support of professionalism and obviously ethical behavior about their own faculty, and especially what seems to be their inability to self-regulate their own faculty.
Well, we actually published a paper on that, talking about academic institutions is what we were, and all of these issues were covered in there. And the problem is, it's like Barbara says, you know, they say, well, you know,
I mean, all it takes is an example once.
Well,
where an institution comes down hard and says, "I'm sorry, you're done. You need to find someplace else."
Yeah, look what happened in Duke. I just got off a committee, an IOM committee, looking at what happened at Duke, where they had one bad apple who published over a dozen articles, made up information, just made it up. You know, the drug company loved it, and they're still hurting. And the report just came out. It's the IOM report on its genomics. It was a genomics kind of thing. That guy is gone. His career's finished, and Duke is smarting. And,
but for example, Harvard is the guy.
Oh, God, Harvard, right next to them is, they built the... Yeah, I agree with you. I mean, obviously, I've spent my life trying to fight this thing, and I think if every one of us just says, we're not going to tolerate this, that's the only time that it's going to happen. I mean, when I was Vice Dean for Academic Affairs and Faculty, there were a couple of incidences, and those people, one is gone, and two others could do no research, could accept no money for research for 2 years. One of them ruined the career because The other one was able to work because that guy he was just, if you can say innocent, but, huh? Foolish. That's a much better word. He was foolish because like Barbara's example.
I don't appreciate it.
Yeah, but it's gotta be consistent, and you say, I'm not gonna tolerate it, and that's it. Yes?
What about retraction? Because I feel that retraction brings a lot of shame, so it is a good disciplinary mechanism. But I think in all the examples you showed, there weren't any retractions.
Yeah, well, you got to be careful about retracting, because when you retract an article, you say that the information in there is false. I had, in 11 and a half years, I published one retraction. You try to get it so that you're not retracting, although the number of retractions is like this. That retraction was from China. And the only way I was able to do it was because the dean in China was someone trained in the West, and it took him a year. And but he wrote back. He says, "You're absolutely correct. This is bogus." So we published the retraction. I spent a week in China last year or the year before. I gave 8 talks in 2 days on conflict of interest all over the place, using that example. And there you have to talk to them about saving face and why journal editors are very, very, very jaundiced about papers coming out of China. The Chinese government provides money to their hospitals. All the medical schools and hospitals in China are pretty much run by the government, except Beijing Union Medical College and the one in Shanghai. And what they do is, if their investigators publish a paper in a journal with an impact factor above 2, they get a tremendous bonus. If it's 2 to 5, it's even larger bonus. If it's over 10, it's more than a year's salary. And so, okay? But retractions, you've got to be very careful. And you've got to prove that what's in there is false. And that takes the cooperation of the institution. And I'm sure that's why Jeff, on that Vioxx, which everybody knows it's baloney. They just hid. Okay? Avandia is another one. That's the paper I showed you by Steve Nissen. Avandia is another one where they try to manipulate.
You say everybody knows, but everybody doesn't. I mean, somebody who wasn't around when all the roar was going on and looks back at the literature, it's still there.
And it's not
I mean, it
Yeah.
doesn't go away.
Oh, absolutely.
And even when they're retracted.
Well, a retraction, there's a big,
Right.
and when there's a letter of concern, that's shown too, but it's still there. But a retraction, it's no longer in the literature; it's taken away, and there is a note that it was retracted.
Well, it's still in the print literature. It's not in the online.
Ah, yes, yes.
But that's the problem.
That's the
Everything's
problem.
still
You're
there.
absolutely correct, Barbara. That's it.
One more question.
Yes.
Yes, I spent part of my life doing an Alzheimer's prevention trial involving celecoxib and naproxen. And being a naive country boy, I'd never heard of use patents until I was involved in that. I discovered that one of the investigators had a use patent being, in this case, well, if the stuff is good in preventing this condition, then we get a royalty. And 2 of the institutions in which were involved had use patents. And, I think related to Jim's point, well, certainly those are the institutional use patent is a
Exactly.
pretty major conflict of interest.
That's right.
But, we haven't discovered. It wasn't, it sort of bumped onto it. So, I don't think we have very good sensors with regard to those sorts of conflicts.
Well, that's why when I said I'm spending the rest of my life talking about patient care and professionalism, to me, conflict of interest is a big part of professionalism. Not so much with nurses, because only the nurses who do research And they don't usually do this kind of research. In public health, it's because you do this kind of research, it's medicine is big time. Because you control not only the research, but you write the prescriptions. And so, and law and business, the business are pushing it. And law, they're very careful. They're risk adverse, and so you sort of, just make sure that you're honest enough that you don't lose money by going to court or face whatever. I agree with you. I don't know what to do with this except just keep talking about it. Vigilance, that's right. I could give this talk somewhere in the world every day of the week. I get requests. I just can't do it. You just can't do it. But others can do it, and it's what we're trying to do. So if anybody else has a question, I'll wait here and answer it for you.
Thank you.
Patty says.
I never know when